Hello everyone, and welcome to the first Saturday sit and talk on my YouTube channel. I'm JBJ, and I'll be bringing you one of these every Saturday best as I can. I will be talking about software development, web development, and programming. A little background about myself first. I am a web developer. I have been in the field for around 5 to 6 years. I started as a self-taught programmer. I started developing in Objective-C and the Cocoa framework for the iOS devices. Later I moved on to web development, and I've been focusing a lot on that in the past 2 years, and especially on PHP, because that's where I think the real fun is. It's in the back-end programming. Now, what I want to talk about today, oh, and sorry about the mess behind me, I'm actually in kind of a moving situation, so I'll try and get that straightened out before the next video. But what I want to talk about today is PHP frameworks, or actually just frameworks in general. When I start a new project in PHP, or if we go back like 6 months, when I started a new project, I would just fire up my editor, start programming. But now, I have started asking myself one simple question before I start a project. Should I use a framework? And it's actually a difficult question because my feelings toward frameworks are somewhat mixed. Now, I will be talking out of a PHP perspective, but that doesn't mean this cannot be applied to any other programming language that has frameworks. But first, let me try and define how I see a framework, and use a metaphor that I actually think describes my feelings towards these frameworks very well. If we imagine that we want to buy a house, so we want to buy a house, we have two options. Well, in general, we have two options, simply put. We can buy a house that's already there. We just have to move in our furniture, and we're done. We can also build our own house. Now, if we build our own house, we can actually make anything we want. We can make a 4-story dinosaur if that's our thing. We have every option available because all we have is just a piece of land, and on this piece of land we can build our empire. Now, if we move into a pre-built house, we can achieve the whole, buying a house, moving in, starting a family process a lot sooner, but we're also bound by limitations because, well, the house is already there. We can't customize as much as we want to, but we can always add to the house. We can break down a wall, add another room, do some home improvements, but it's actually more costly than it is if we did what we wanted the first time around. Now, without taking this metaphor too far, what my point is, it's that if we use a framework, we can do some things very, very quickly. If we take Cake PHP, for example, they have something called a cake bake, where you can define some table structures. So we can say, like, we have this table here in a database, and we have this table here. We put this into the Cake console and say, can you go ahead and bake this for me, please? So Cake will actually look at all these tables, look at their relations, and it will create model classes and views for us for the 4 CRUD operations to create, read, update, and delete records in these 2 tables. Now, this is a very powerful concept if we want to prototype, because all we have to do is create a database, press a button, and it will create ways for us to manipulate with these databases without us having to lift a finger. Very powerful stuff. But the problem here is that if we want to customize this, well, we can't really do as much as we want to. Sure, we can go ahead and change these views up, but if we really want to change too much, it will actually be faster if we just wrote the views ourselves. And this is the problem I see with frameworks in general. If we develop in their style, we can get things done very fast. But if we want to do things differently, we would have to learn the core workings of framework before we can go ahead and change too much. So a framework can be a great thing to use, but we have to be very aware of the limitations that it also brings to the table. Another problem with the frameworks is actually the learning curve. Especially with Cake PHP, that there's a high learning curve, and I think it applies to every big framework in general, that it takes a lot of time to get used to. It's a different way to work with something that you're used to. I mean, I've written PHP for years, but when I step into the Cake PHP world, I feel lost. I mean, I can't figure out what this does or how this works, or sometimes I can sit with a task and I know that if I just had regular PHP, I could accomplish it, like that. But now that I'm in a Cake PHP environment, I got to figure out, okay, well, how does Cake handle this issue? You could say, yeah, you can just go ahead and make this in PHP. You don't have to use the Cake for this because it's just a framework and it's written in PHP, so you're actually just working in PHP, it's not another language. And yeah, sure, I can do that. But if we start to use a framework and then we do all of these different tasks that isn't really part of the framework, then we're just using like framework for a tiny bit of our application and the other is just regular PHP. Then it actually gets messy and the readability is, well, I want to say the readability is almost non-existent, because you look at the project and say, okay, well, they use Cake PHP, so I expect it to work like this and like this. But oh, okay, well, he didn't do that. But okay, he did something else. Okay, this isn't really how Cake PHP projects should look like, and then you have a whole lot of trouble. So if you do decide to use a framework, then you should, as far as possible, develop within the framework's guidelines. It's just like building an MVC application. If you say, okay, well, I want to use Model View Controller, then please do so. But don't start using Model View Controller for half your application and then not for the other half, unless you have a very, very good reason not to. So I've talked about what frameworks are, and I've shared my viewpoints on it. But where do I actually land? Do I like them or don't I? And I'm actually torn. I have seen a lot of frameworks in PHP. There's CodeIgniter, Laravel, and Cake PHP, to name a few of the bigger ones. And they all have a really steep learning curve. And another problem with that is that if you want to learn Cake PHP, well, that's great. It takes some time to get used to. But when you master it, you're golden, right? Well, not as much, because just because you know Cake PHP doesn't mean you know anything about Laravel or CodeIgniter. The two very, very different things, even though they're all built from PHP. So I can actually feel like frameworks are a different language sometimes. But when I work on a project, I tend to just use regular PHP. And maybe it's because I'm just too lazy to learn new frameworks, or maybe it's just because I feel I have more control. But I think if you want to start on a really, really big project, like, you want to build something very complicated and it's going to have a lot of stuff in it, a lot of features, then I think you should consider a framework, because frameworks can save you a lot of time, because they take a lot of common tasks and make them very simple. So if you invest in the time to learn framework, and you know the project you're making is going to take a long time, then the time you spent learning the framework will actually be time saved building the projects. And well, the next time you build a project, you would use the same framework because you already know it, so even more time saved. You would still be bound by the framework's limitations, and that's, well, we're also bound by PHP's limitations. So I guess it's not too bad, but it's just something you have to think about when you're coding. You have to think, okay, well, I'm using this framework, so I have to code in this style in order to make my application look clean and have a good readability in my code. Which is also another thing that frameworks does really well, is that they do aid in readability. They do make it simplified if you know the framework. But one of the other issues with frameworks is the fact that you're not really sure about the future. We can say with certainty that PHP is going to be around for many, many years. But do we know that about CakePHP or CodeIgniter? Well, they are pretty big frameworks and widely supported, so yeah, we can probably say that. But there are smaller frameworks where you just don't know it. I mean, when PHP 7 launches, will they get up to speed on that, and how fast? That's another limitation, because frameworks will always be a step behind when the core language changes, because they need to update everything, and you're not even sure it's actually going to happen, because what if they just, well, stop supporting it? Then you either have to wait for someone else to start supporting it, support it yourself, or move on to another framework, and then you suffer this whole learning curve setback again. But all in all, frameworks are here to stay, and we should use them. Like, I don't know anyone that uses plain JavaScript and not jQuery. I haven't met a single company that says, well, we don't want to use jQuery, it's too complicated. But jQuery is also one of the frameworks that's actually very simple. So the learning curve is not as high as it is in many other frameworks. But I think we live in a world now where we need to accomplish tasks a lot faster, because we need to solve problems, or more complex problems, and we need to solve them faster. And frameworks can help us do that. But with everything in this field, we need to think about what we're doing. We don't just have to use a framework. We don't have to use a framework. We can make our own framework. I mean, the limitations or the possibilities are endless. Well, if I should sum up my main points of this sit and talk, I mean, I've been rambling on about PHP frameworks for about 15 minutes now, and I'll try and keep my videos around 15 minutes. But I've shared my viewpoints on frameworks, what I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in a comment below the video, because I think it's a great topic. I mean, do you use frameworks? Why do you use frameworks, or why don't you use frameworks? Which frameworks do you use, and why do you use them? Where do you land on this? And if someone asked you, should I use a framework for my project? Well, what would you tell him? I would tell him pretty much what I just said now. Well, you have to be aware of the limitations, there's a high learning curve, but in the end it can be very rewarding, it can speed up your projects. And so there's, as with everything here in life, there are pros and there are cons, and you have to weigh these up yourselves, and they vary from person to person. So I'm very interested in hearing, well, where do you land, and what do you recommend? So throw a comment down in the video. Thank you so much for watching, and if there's any particular topic you'd like me to address next Saturday, please let me know. I will post a new video the next Saturday, so keep a lookout for that. And if you want to support me, please do subscribe to my video, throw a like button, throw a comment, watch another of my videos, or make a donation. If you're really in a good mood, you can make a donation, and the information will be right below the video. And the donations obviously help to keep me motivated, keep me going, and help me invest in better equipment. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.